Okay, so in this video we're going to have a quick look at the weekly checks you should do just to ensure your car is safe to drive. If you have a quick look in the DVSA's Learning to Drive book on page 30, you will find a mnemonic to help us remember the areas we've got to check, the key areas, and that mnemonic is FLOWER, which stands for fuel, lights, oil, water, electric and rubber. And so we'll come on to have a look at each of those in turn and expand them in a bit more detail to help you understand how you do these crucial safety checks. Okay, the first item of the FLOWER checks are fuel, and it's incredibly simple. Just at the start of each journey, as we turn the ignition on, you can see the fuel gauge comes up and tells us how much fuel we've got, and we just need to decide whether that is enough for the journey we're about to undertake. Now, given that it is such a simple check, it is tragic that every year people die simply because they ran out of fuel. Their car then becomes stranded in a dangerous location, typically on a motorway hard shoulder, which is always a very dangerous place to be, and they get struck by another vehicle. So consequently, given how dangerous it is, you can now actually be charged with careless or inconsiderate driving if you run out of fuel in a dangerous location. And if you think that's just an urban legend perpetuated by driving instructors, do a quick web search for a 2018 legal case involving someone called Tammy Langton and have a read of the details there. But so the simple way to avoid any tragic outcome from your actions or lack of actions, if you look at the fuel gauge and you treat the quarter tank mark where it is now as your trigger point for refilling the tank, that will ensure you never get to the point where you are completely empty. And if social conscience wasn't enough to prompt you to take that action, just also be aware that by running your tank completely dry on a modern car is likely to do expensive damage to your fuel pump. So modern fuel pumps are designed in a way that they actually need fuel running through them to lubricate them or cool them. And so if you run the car completely dry, you can do very expensive damage and ruin a fuel pump. So again, another good reason for keeping your tank well topped up. Okay, so the second letter was L for lights, and we check the lights very simply by switching on our dipped headlights. As you'll see on the dashboard here, you then get a green light confirming that. And at the same time, we can also switch on the hazard warning lights and then walk around the car. And then, as you saw there, with the help of an assistant, we were able to push the brake pedal and also select reverse gear just to check that all rear lights were working. Okay, so we're now looking at oil, which is the O of flower. And the key thing with all under bonnet checks, anything relating to the fluids you put in your car, key thing to do is to check for the specific instructions given in your own car's owner's manual, because all cars will vary slightly. But generally speaking, the dipstick is identified, and they're normally brightly coloured. It'll be some sort of coloured hook or loop that you're going to pull out. The first thing to say is that before you start this process, make sure the car is on level ground. Obviously, if it's parked on a hill, you're trying to measure the level of a fluid, that will affect the accuracy of it. So it needs to be on level ground, and you mustn't have driven the car for about 20 minutes because oil circulates right to the top of the engine. So you need that 20 minutes or so to let it all drain back down into the sump. And then quite simply, you're going to pull the dipstick out. And firstly, we wipe it clean just with a piece of tissue. So the measuring stick is now completely dry. As you can see, there are two little niches in there, which is where we hope the oil is going to be between, but we now reinsert it. Make sure you push it right down so it's fully against its stop there. So we get an accurate measure. We then pull it out again, keep it horizontal, and as you can see there, the oil is just towards the upper notch, which is where we'd hope it would be. So that is absolutely fine. On most cars, and again, you do need to check this with your own handbook, but generally the difference between the bottom mark, so the minimum mark, and the maximum mark is 1 litre of oil. So let's just put that back in. So when you go to a garage, you buy top-up packs in handy 1 litres, and so this will be the specification for this particular car that will have been referred to in the owner's handbook. But you must, with modern engines, it's even more important than ever that you get the correct oil for the car. And then, as I say, between the bottom, the minimum and a maximum mark is about 1 litre. So if it's halfway down, you'd be putting in about half a litre. But it's always best to put in a little bit less and then top it up some more than putting in too much, because you can't take it out. And overfilling an engine with oil can be equally as dangerous as underfilling it. We do need to put any in, which we don't on this occasion, but as you can see, here's the oil filler cap, and as you can see there, it says recommended Castrol, so this is a Castrol branded oil of the specification required. And we simply unscrew that cap, put it safely to one side so it doesn't fall off, and then you would pour the oil in. It may, to avoid spilling, if you've got a clean, it must be scrupulously clean, but if you've got a funnel like that, that can help you. And then on the side of these packs, you've got rough measures. As you can see, there's a clear or translucent marker line there that you can see the fluid level just at the bottom there, so you can top it up in 250ml increments. And then, having done that, crucially make sure you reinsert your cap firmly. Okay, so we're now on to the letter W, which stands for water, and that's actually a slightly misleading term. It's actually referring to the fluid levels, and the key 3 fluid levels on most cars will be brake fluid, engine coolant, and then screen wash. And again, your owner's handbook will identify and help you identify where each of these reservoirs are. But just as a simple way to try and help you identify it, if you're unsure, or a car that you haven't got a manual for, if you think of the brake fluid first of all, if you think where the brake pedal is when you sit in the driver's seat and you push the pedal straight in front of you, that is pretty much where you're going to find the brake fluid reservoir. So that's quite an easy way of remembering that one. It's normally, not always, but normally it will be directly in front of where the brake pedal is. So we can identify that one. We can then have a look for the screen wash reservoir. And again, if you look at this blue cap here, it's got a bit of a symbol on it, which looks like a windscreen and the spraying pattern of a screen wash. And so that's a reasonably universal symbol now for screen wash. So having eliminated the first 2, we're then left with this big reservoir here, this tank here, which is in fact the engine coolant reservoir. So looking at each of those in turn, we start with the brake fluid. Again, as we've said before, for each of these you should be referring to your own manufacturer's handbook for the appropriate fluids you should be using with them. Brake fluid reservoirs are notoriously difficult to see through, so they are slightly opaque. You'll find there's a maximum and a minimum line on that. They are very, very difficult to see through. Sometimes if you shake the car slightly, you can see the fluid level moving. Or alternatively shine a torch through it, that sometimes helps, but they're not easy to read. General point of principle, we avoid taking the cap off if at all possible, because they are the fluid is hygroscopic and we want to minimize the amount of water that's absorbed. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, we will unscrew the cap, and if you look down into it, you can see a light yellowy colored fluid, and so we have fluid in there. And that's positive, and it's also the colour of the fluid is quite important. If that's looking very dark and brown, it suggests the fluid is a number of years old and is in need of change. But so generally you're checking that it's between the maximum and the minimum mark. Now, brake fluid level will drop very slowly over time as the brake pads are worn, but it should really last between services. If you're having it topped up at an annual service, that should last you to the next service. So if you notice a sudden drop and it gets to the minimum level, you need to be getting your brakes checked. Hopefully most cars will have, as you can see here, the sensor there, a warning light, so if it drops suddenly you will also be getting a warning light on the dashboard. If you did need to top it up, as you can see on the top here, brake fluid is specified in DOT, and this is DOT 4 fluid, so you would identify a DOT 4 fluid should it need topping up in an emergency situation. Next element to look at is the engine coolant, And the first thing to say about this one is crucially important, never ever take the cap off of this one when the engine is hot. So you want to be able to place your hand on it and check that that is nice and cold, as that is now, before you ever consider taking the top off of that. This coolant is under extreme pressure, and if I took the top off when it was pressurized, it would come flying out and do serious scalding injuries. So that's a crucial thing to remember. Never take the top off when the engine is hot. So check it is cool to the touch. Then again, there is a maximum and a minimum line. Now the coolant system really is a sealed circuit, it's a sealed system, so you shouldn't be losing coolant level. It may fluctuate just slightly around the maximum and minimum lines, depending on whether the engine is hot or cold and is expanded, but the level shouldn't actually drop. If it is dropping, you will, you should get the car checked, because you've probably got a problem with that. Finally, we have the screen wash, and this, if you are using your washers regularly to keep your screen clean, which is a good thing when driving, you will need to top this up quite regularly, and you do that simply by lifting the cap and pouring the fluid in there. On most cars now, there is no visible maximum minimum marker, but the key thing to do is just to make sure that's topped, brimmed right up to the top here every week during your weekly checks, and then you'll know you'll never run out. You can either buy pre-mixed fluid, which will come in 5-litre containers, or like this one here, for example, this is a concentrate, so a 250ml concentrate, which you then dilute with tap water to make many litres that will fill your reservoir. Really important that you use a screen wash additive for many reasons. As it says here, this will protect down to minus 72 degrees C, which hopefully we won't get to those sort of temperatures, but certainly in winter months, if this was filled just with water, it would freeze in winter months. You'd then go to clear your screen and it wouldn't work. Similarly, if this reservoir is empty and you're going along a motorway at high speed and a lorry flicks muck and road mess all over your windscreen, and you put your wipers on, and there's no fluid in there, or the fluid is frozen, you'll get what's called a dry wipe, where the wiper blades smear the mess all across the windscreen, and you have no way of clearing it. So you're then doing 70 miles an hour along a motorway and you can't see out. So it's crucially important that you use an additive to help clean, help keep it from freezing, also help clean, and it lubricates the rubber of the wipers so the wipers don't judder and make squeaky noises. So lots of benefits from adding an additive rather than just water to your screen wash. Okay, so we're now on to E for electrics. Most of the electrical circuits on a modern car will be covered by monitoring systems, and you'll get various warning lights, as you can see when you first switch on. And they will gradually go off, so as we put our seatbelt on, that one will extinguish. What you will see here is we've got a battery-shaped light, positive and negative. That's the battery light, and that is indicating at the moment the engine isn't running, so the battery isn't getting a charge. Okay, but when we switch the engine on and the alternator starts charging the battery, that should go out. So let's hope it does. And yeah, and it does. And so that's an indication, the fact that that light has gone out, that our alternator is working and we are getting charged to replenish the battery. So if that light comes on, that battery, that red battery-shaped light illuminates while you're driving, that's an indication that you have some fault with your electrical system. So we'll now just have a look under the bonnet and have a look at the battery itself and other elements of the electrical system. Okay, so this is the car's battery, which provides its starting electricity. So that was the E for electric. Modern batteries tend to be sealed for life. So on older batteries, you used to have various caps along the top here, which you'd have to top up with distilled water. Most modern batteries have done away with that, and they are called what's called sealed for life. So there's very limited maintenance you can do with a car battery or need to do. One thing is just check that it is secure. Battery is quite a weighty lump, so just make sure that it is firmly bolted down, as we can see here, and it's not come loose in any way, and that the two contacts, so in this case you've got to remove the cover, but that the contacts are firmly secured and not corroded in any way. Again, corrosion is much less common on modern batteries, but if you are getting any sort of furring or corrosion around the battery terminal and it doesn't look particularly clean, suggests there's either some leak from the battery or some problem overcharging with the charging system. So worth getting that checked. And then the other element of the charging system, so that's the battery which stores energy for when we want to restart the car. When the engine is running, this is the alternator. And you can see you've got a big rubber band here. It's called a serpentine belt. And so you just want to check that that isn't in any way cracked or frayed, because if that belt snaps, the alternator stops turning, and then you don't get charge back into your battery, and none of your other electrical components will work for very long. So at that point you would be getting the warning light on the dashboard that we spoke of earlier, but it's worth checking as preventative maintenance that that belt is looking in good condition, and if it's not, get some advice and get that changed. Okay, so the other areas to check as part of your electrical checks are just check that key electrical components are working. So for example, your heating and ventilation controls are working. Obviously they're crucially important, particularly in winter months, for demisting the screen. You start driving and you suddenly discover your heater motor is not working and you can't see out of the screen, and that causes you a problem. Similarly, the rear screen should be displaying a light. Just check all those functions work. And then controls if you're in a safe place to do it. Things like the horn, you can just check all of those electrical components are functioning correctly. Okay, so the next area we're going to look at are the rubber elements of the car, and that's crucially the tyres, the wiper blades, and also the serpentine belt, which we've looked at previously in the electrical section. First thing we're going to do is just turn the wheels to full lock and have a look at our tyres. Okay, so tyres are the only thing connecting the car to the road, so incredibly important that we have good quality pieces of rubber on each corner of the car. They're so important that we've made a full detailed video on this subject alone, so we'll only cover this very briefly. But the weekly checks you're making at a very basic level, you want to check that we have the full tread width across the full width of the tyre, and as a simple test you can use the 20p test. So the rim of the 20p test there, the rim of the 20p, you insert that into the groove of the tyre, and then you can see that as you look across the tyre, your tyre tread depth is too low. In this case you can't see the tread of it. If it was up like that and you could see it, that would be too low, but in this case the tyre's got plenty of tread, so that's fine. And then the other thing you need to do on a weekly basis is just check your tyres pressures, and you do this when the car hasn't been driven, so the tyres need to be cold to get an accurate reading, and all you need is a simple pencil gauge like this one, which you push on, and then you can read this is 30,123 psi. Check that against your owner's handbook, or normally there's a sticker either on the door jamb or under the petrol flap or somewhere like that for your specific car. Very important then to reinsert the cap to ensure road muck doesn't get in there and cause your valve to leak. When checking the back tyres, obviously the front ones we can rotate to help us have a good look around them. With the back tyres, not quite so easy, and it does mean you will have to get down low and possibly lie right under to have a good look and make sure you can inspect the full width of the tyre. So best pick a dry day to do that properly. The other key rubber element on a car are your windscreen wipers, these rubber blades. And it's very important that they aren't in any way fraying, cracked or broken in any way, so just inspect those for any obvious damage. And then it will become apparent obviously as you use the wipers, if they aren't clearing the screen, if they're smearing the screen or juddering, then it's a good indication that the wipers are old and the rubber has hardened or perished and is in need of a replacement. So again, given how crucially important it is to be able to see where we're going, wipers both front and rear are another rubber item, really important you check. Other rubber items within the engine bay, as we've already touched on in the electrical section, is the rubber serpentine belt. You want to check that isn't cracked or frayed in any way. If that snaps, you lose all your electrics, which will very promptly cause the car to stop. And then just have a glance around in the engine, you'll see there are many rubber hoses. And over here, for example, lots of rubber hoses. Just look for any obvious signs of any leaks or any bulges. Hoses, when they go, tend to expand and bulge and balloon in funny ways, so just have a glance around and check there's nothing obviously leaking, maybe down here at the radiator. And those are another key rubber element of a car that obviously if you lose the coolant from an engine, very quickly your car will overheat and leave you stranded. So well worth checking those points and getting it checked by a garage if you're unsure before a problem occurs.